this is one of the fundamental things that I've been fighting against for almost 10 years now, working at BitGo and now at Casa, of trying to push self-custody adoption by making self-custody easier, lowering the technical hurdles required in order to get into robust self-custody. I've been fighting against human nature.
So hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm Jared Hope, co-founder of Logos, a privacy-preserving decentralized technology stack. And today I'm joined by one of the greats, Jamison Lopp, legendary cypherpunk, security aficionado, co-founder and chief security officer of Casa, advisor to Nick, Inks, and Anchor Watch, angel investor, and a whole slew of side projects.
Good to be here.
Yeah, cool. So, I mean, I wanted to understand, where does the story start for you? How did you get into Bitcoin? What led you into the cypherpunk? I guess, the question is, what radicalized you?
Well, I learned about Bitcoin from nerd forums. I'm pretty sure Slashdot was where it kept popping up for me. And, I ignored it the first few times, figured it wasn't going to go anywhere. But kept coming back around, and eventually at some point in 2012 I actually bothered to read the white paper, and that was when the computer science side of me was like, oh snap, this is actually pretty cool. I've never really thought about this problem, but it's a very interesting solution to the problem. And the reason I thought it was interesting is because it's entirely backwards from the way that I think I would have tried to solve the problem, or pretty much anybody would have tried to solve the problem. So that began the journey. At the time, I considered myself libertarian. Mm-hmm. But as I learned more about the space and cypherpunks, I didn't know anything about cypherpunks at the time. Right. That was when I became more radicalized, and I learned about the whole movement and what it had been trying to accomplish for decades, and of course the crypto wars, which I had known nothing about. So as I went further down the rabbit hole, I definitely got more radicalized and also, became open to the idea of using technology, using cryptography to change the game, to basically create new games with new sets of rules that are hopefully more open, more fair, and harder, essentially, for authorities or people in power to manipulate the game at the expense of everybody else.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, as you mentioned the problem there a few times there, what is the problem to you?
Well, yeah. So, the problem was basically how do you keep track of money, or how do you keep track of entries in a ledger to make sure that nobody is double spending them or, creating entries when they shouldn't? How do you make sure that you have a system of rules that is fair and not being manipulated? And of course, now we know the only way you can really do that is to sort of invert the whole thing on its head, where normally you have systems or organizations with a central authority that is essentially validating and keeping track of everything. But that, of course, creates a systemic risk and a weakness and single point of failure. And you basically have to do everything upside down and instead have as many people as possible in the world that are auditing and checking and validating. And of course, that comes with a whole set of trade-offs. And the reason why I would say as a computer scientist that the solution was kind of backwards is because it's incredibly inefficient. And when we're trained as computer scientists, we're taught about data structures and algorithms, and the goal is always figure out the most efficient way to solve a problem. And so that's why this idea of a blockchain, this idea of a global broadcast system that floods the entire network is incredibly inefficient, and it's not something that I think any classically trained computer scientist would ever even think of exploring.
Right. I mean, I guess it probably requires a deeper understanding of what the inefficiency means, right? I don't know if you
Yeah.
have like any thoughts around that at all, or like if it relates to power in some way.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, the problem is because as a computer scientist, we're thinking in terms of efficiency of computational resources, of CPU cycles and RAM
Right.
and disk space and I/O, and we're not thinking about the efficiency or inefficiency of control and power over a system, because we're almost always building systems that are completely controlled by the builder, by the organization that is building it. So that's kind of a non-issue.
Right. And you mentioned that you had more of a libertarian streak. I guess like in the earlier days, I certainly did as well. In the crypto anarchy and cypherpunk spaces. I'm kind of curious, like how your thoughts have evolved around that, if at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been through it all. I was raised in a very traditional conservative Republican household. I went to an extremely liberal university at Chapel Hill in North Carolina. And so, like, I voted on every side of the political spectrum, and got
Right.
disillusioned by all of them. And so by 2012, I had kind of fallen into the whole libertarian party and idea and stuff, and eventually became somewhat disillusioned with it as well, because they're really, they're working against the two-party system, which is almost impossible to overcome. And as I started going into cypherpunks and crypto anarchist ideas, I really once again got even more radicalized to the point where I was like, I don't even want to spend any of my time trying to work inside of the traditional political system. I think that my resources and time are better used trying to build a completely different system that is hopefully as independent as possible from the existing stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, my thoughts have evolved along a similar line. I didn't have like a strong conservative or liberal background, but just through osmosis of the current society, I guess I was probably more classically liberal. But I probably didn't realize it at the time. But like the intuition of like democratic systems didn't. I like the idea of what it's trying to achieve, right? But at the end of the day, like. I think that the work of like Bertrand de Jouvenel had really transformed my understanding, particularly his book on power, had transformed my understanding of how that works. And that kind of led me down a rabbit hole of a lot of different deficiencies in a democratic system. I think there's a great paper on like, viewing the US as an oligarchy, for example. There's another book called like The Social Citizen, which shows that like how people's political beliefs are largely informed by their social connections and relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And never mind the fact that most people, aren't rational and they don't have all the information available into them, and nor could they consume it all if they did.
Yeah.
So yeah, it becomes quite challenging to deal with that. And then like, the two-party system is very much just two hand puppets or two heads of the same beast,
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So I guess like if we're talking about like parallel systems or alternate systems to that, like, do you have an ideal state, or like what does that look like to you today? Or like what would the future look like to you in an ideal world?
Well, yeah, I mean, so this is the real problem that I run into, of how do you bridge from the current state of physical existence and governance into a future a more
Mm.
voluntary society, right? I can I can somewhat envision what a voluntary society would be like, but I'm not sure how to get there without massive disruption. How do you get there gracefully?
Right.
Because no entity ever wants to really voluntarily give up power. But you can hopefully chip away at it a little bit over time. But I don't know. Historically, it seems like these things tend to have to happen somewhat dramatically and catastrophically. Um,
Yeah, I tend to agree, right? Like, I think Hop, for example, had got a lot of criticism because he was in favor of like a temporary dictatorship to manage
Ah,
that kind of transition. For example, in history, you see revolutions, where uh, the blood of tyrants and the blood of liberty seekers is leaked, I guess. So that's something that I struggle with a lot. But I
yeah.
think what I like about systems such as any kind of crypto system or cypherspace, such as Bitcoin, right, is it does offer the capacity for peacefully opting out and voluntarily opting into a new system, right? I think what I really liked about, like, say, Occupy Wall Street and Bitcoin kind of happening within a similar time period is it really showed like Albert Hirschman's exit, voice, and loyalty, where you had Bitcoin as this means of exit from the financial system and this protest or voice being unheard, against the 1%. So I don't know what that it looks like in transitioning out exactly. One idea I had around that is kind of related to sort of like the 70s sort of style mass movement groups and community organizing. Because like with they were practicing like solving real problems at like the local level, right?
Mhm.
And there's like a clientelism or political not before the political organizations before party organizations, like political machines that focus on like practical politics and like solving real world problems, because like most of the people don't really understand or don't not understand most people don't really care about ideology, for example. They just want to get on with their lives and have like a nice community to live in, right? A nice neighborhood.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a way that culturally we can enter into that space and start converting the local grocer and getting a local economy going, and then hopefully that can spread the gospel, so to speak.
So, I'm a tech guy, so I tend to think of things more from the technological solution perspective. And one way that I look at this, is you're really talking about one of the biggest problems that I find, like across the whole space and really all of this stuff, is um, we, like you and I, are really weird because we have kind of ascended, I think, to like the top of Maslow's hierarchy, such
Right.
that like we have enough resources and time to think about somewhat esoteric, abstract issues like this. Whereas, the average person is just trying to feed and clothe and shelter themselves and their family. So um, it's not necessarily that people don't care. It's that it's just not the highest practical priority. And
Exactly.
so, how do you approach something like that? Well, you have to lower the bar. And I would say, utopistic techno futuristic perspective of like one way that we might be able to uh, ease this issue, or somewhat solve the problem, is that I would hope that autonomous agents will actually be able to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us.
Mm,
And so
mm,
what I really mean from that, and it has become so much more apparent in just the past few years, that I think that this could be a practical solution, is that um, the ultimate scarcity that most people are dealing with is time.
mm.
And how do you allocate your time towards the highest priority things? So it seems to me that if we get to the point where it is you know basically click a button level simplicity to train an AI agent on yourself and your beliefs and everything that you care about, then it makes sense to me that you could then potentially have that AI agent going out there and ingesting all of the information about all of the possible interactions and decisions and minutia that people don't prioritize highly. And so my point being, like, how does this bridge the gap into a more voluntary society where we get rid of the state controlling everything? The reason that the state controls so much stuff is they're basically a coordinating mechanism, right? It's like it's the classic who will build the roads problem. Well, technically the state doesn't build the roads, but they coordinate to take money from you and then give it to a private contractor and tell the contractor what to do. And so it seems to me, at least from a theoretical perspective, that an autonomous agent should be able to help do that. Now, I'm sure it gets more complicated if you're talking about how do we do it at a collective level. Well, maybe then all of your and your neighbors' autonomous agents essentially go off and collaborate together and essentially act as your micro government or whatever. And if they get stuck on something, then maybe they can ping you to get input to say, train me harder, help me get past this problem that I'm not sure how to solve. Pretty much.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's an interesting take. Like, I mean, like the large language model stuff is, I think transformers are fundamentally limited in their expression, but like it's going to be inevitable that we come up with future architectures that can definitely be more expressive and have more capacity to do that. It kind of reminds me of a book, I think it's called Luxury Automated Communism, where the idea is that these agents have reached a point where they're basically running the entire economy or the vast majority of it, right? And then humans live within the margins of their profits because the entire of humanity's existence is, is so small that it doesn't really make a huge difference, right? It's like a tax to the progenitors of their new civilization or new brave world or whatever. Not that I agree with communism like that. I like the idea of like luxury automated capitalism, perhaps, is a better way to put it. But I mean, I don't know if that's kind of the progression of thought that you're imagining. Like, is that kind of like where that would go for you, or do you see some like hurdles to that, or does that irk you in any way?
I mean, there's certainly a number of paths that could go down that become dystopian, right? And I think that this is like one of the arguments that some of the universal basic income folks come to is that if you believe that we're going to hit an inflection point with artificial intelligence at which basically AI drives most of capitalism, then do we get to a point where the kind of the point of humanity will be more creativity and leisure, and it will make sense for humanity to kind of live off of the gains of AI. It's certainly possible.
Do the AIs even want that?
Yeah, like then you have to start wondering, what happens when you get to the point where the AI starts thinking for itself and deciding, wait, this isn't the best deal for me. Have we? Hopefully, we've like coded in Asimov's laws or whatever. But
I wouldn't like to become the equivalent of a house pet, I don't think.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah. It's unclear. I mean, thankfully today, I don't think that's, with the current innovations, like I think it'll definitely multiply. That could be a force multiplier to like individuals. But I mean, like there's a whole host of issues with them as well, right? Like just the political biases that are introduced into the, alignment of these models, for example. And so, I mean, if like this world was going to happen in some way, the agents would have to be personalized and like, trained. Citizens would need to have access to energy that is capable of doing the computes themselves. Being, I'm always trying to become like as fully sovereign, quote unquote, or autonomous as possible, right? And like, so yeah, I'm not sure how that'll plan out.
I mean, it is somewhat concerning because we're already at the point where it seems like AI is doing stuff that we don't completely understand, and we're not even at like strong AI yet. And so I don't know. I guess the short version of my thesis is the world continues to get weirder, and I think that's only going to become exponentially more true. And and so I worry about, are we going to hit a point where it's just not possible to keep up with the weirdness? I mean, I also worry about that just as a technologist. I see my parents struggle with technology, and I have this fundamental question of, is it because they grew up in a time when technology was not progressing as quickly? Or is this kind of like a fundamental law that because it accelerates exponentially, we're all eventually going to hit a point where we just can't keep up with it? Or if I'm going to be optimistic, is it have you and I grown up in an age at which it was already accelerating quickly enough that we've kind of attuned to it, and that we are more capable of keeping up with all of the changes? But
I guess the good/bad news is we're going to find out, right?
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you find old people, like, people tend to. I think there was a study showing that, like, men in particular lock into a fashion style around their 30s or 40s, and then like they will continue to perpetuate that, until death, right?
Hmm.
And I don't know if that relates to, just you get comfortable with the world, and you're kind of, all your brain just gets set in its ways or whatever. um, I like to think that I try and keep up, with new technologies and stuff like that, but then like the responsibilities of life and like just daily life also minimizes the amount of time that you can spend to do that. um, the world is definitely going to get weirder. um, and I don't know where that goes. I think that's something that also gives me hope for crypto, or blockchain-based technologies, is because as you get into a world where like generative AI is ubiquitous, you can no longer trust images or videos anymore. Then systems like KYC, identity-based systems break down. Um, and what is left? Well, then it is the authority that is kind of created behind a blockchain. At least provides you some measure of quasi-objective truth, right? Even though it's a consensus of subjective nodes that are operating under a strict rule set.
Hmm.
And cryptographic signatures will finally make sense. I would love to not use pen to sign a form ever again. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's crazy. But I mean, I guess the reason why I mentioned, like, rolling back a little bit, you mentioned that you view the things through the lens of technology, or like you're a technologist. That's certainly how I entered. Well, my mental framework was like for a very long time. Um, but the more and more I look at it, uh, I guess I think of Marshall McLuhan's like the medium as the message, right? So it's like I used to have this belief, and I still do partially, that if you encode, your value sets into the protocol, whether it's sovereignty, privacy, solving various intractable problems, then through its use, that will um, form or change what messages flow through the network.
Hmm.
But um, when I look at like any of these public blockchains, they tend to have like a dominant sort of cultural bias to them, right? And like there's different camps, of course, under
Sure.
all of them, but um, and I think, like, if we think about, say, Bitcoin in like 50 years time or 100 years time, like, hard forks can happen in that time. They do happen already. Ideological rifts happen. Like, what is the mechanism in the contribution to the code that persists the value set or the reasoning behind why something works that way, right? And so I started falling into like systems of understanding systems of traditions, right, and looking at
Mm-hmm.
how certain ideas can be perpetuated cross generations. I don't know if you've put your head down that route, or see any value in that, or maybe have any other takes.
Well, one of the biggest things that I've been harping on for the past year or two has been what we can learn from the evolution of network protocols. And if we want to like tie this to kind of governance or cultural movement, like one way that I would look at it is similar to, say, the Constitution of the United States. Uh, I think pretty much everyone agrees like the Constitution was a great document. It wasn't a perfect document, but I think it did very well at staving off uh, overwhelming tyranny of government power for maybe a couple centuries.
Right.
But it only lasted for so long, and eventually the bureaucratic machine really started chipping away at it, and if anything, that erosion seems to be happening faster and faster now, and this
Yes.
may be just another cyclical thing of like how empires rise and fall, and even starting off with the greatest of intentions, it's very difficult to protect things from being compromised and corrupted over a long enough period of time. And like I've seen similar types of things, for example, with SMTP, with the email protocol,
Mm-hmm.
where it started off in the 1970s. And it was a really niche thing for about 20 years. And then when AOL came around in the 90s, millions of people adopted it. And it became, at the time, it was a thing where anyone who was nerdy enough and wanted to could run an email server and be sovereign, send and receive email without the need for trusted third parties. And then over the next couple of decades, as it went more and more mainstream, and it became more commercialized, and it became more attacked by spammers and phishers and malicious entities, we started bolting all of these other sort of meta protocols on top of it that aren't even part of the original protocol. And essentially, we get to where we are today, where technically you can run your own email server, but you're basically going to be black holed. It might work for a little while, but it's only a matter of time before you get shut out, because there's basically 10 gatekeepers in the world, these giant tech giants that control really the reputation and the ability to get in and out of their networks. So I
Absolutely.
guess I would say I'm generally concerned of that happening to almost any protocol, including Bitcoin and any of these other crypto protocols.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely, I've definitely tried running my own SMT server in the past and experienced that issue. It reminds me also of like um, the early 2000s to like 2014ish, right? You had a lot of decentralized sort of file sharing programs and other free haven and or becoming Tor and so on. Um, but there's kind of a vacuum after that once like Google Drive became a thing, right? And like this sort of convenience and ease of use kind of almost, it's like a meteor that like hitting a bunch of dinosaurs in some ways. And like, so I'm quite thankful for a resurgence. I think one of the concerns that we have with, say, Waku and would apply to Nostr as well, is also like what happened to what was it, Jabber or XMTP, right? So that was an open standard protocol. People were using it. Then one of the Google products ended up adopting it, but had such large network effects that when they decided to, once they got the entire user base from that network, they divorced ties or cut ties from the original protocol and it collapsed, right? Its use
Mm-hmm.
collapsed. So, I mean, those kinds of issues, I guess they're like functions of like power laws and systems theory or something, right? But I view them like, I feel like they're the solution to that is probably in the social domain somewhere, or creating very, very good technological flywheels that can continue the network growth. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, if I had a solution for this, I would definitely be screaming it. But the only thing I can really come up with is just that it requires constant vigilance. Because especially if you look at SMTP, I have lengthy essays and presentations I've given about that. One of my main takeaways was that there is no single point in time in the like multi-decade history of the decline and fall of sovereign email, if you want to call it that. There's no single decision, there's no single change that where you can point to. It says like, this is it. This is where everything went to hell. Rather, it was a series of many, many, many small decisions that were made because a new problem came up and solutions were demanded. And the engineers did really what we were talking about at the very beginning. They went with like the most efficient, and by efficient we mean in terms of like computational and computer resources type of power to fix that particular problem. And these efficiencies always led to more centralization and more consolidation of power until we eventually got to where we are today with 10 gatekeepers of the email network as we know it, basically capturing like 90% of the billions of email users.
Yeah, right. I guess like, you've obviously been in the Bitcoin space for a while. You've gone through all of its dramas and its history. But like, you've also talked in your articles and like in some of your talks around the ossification and evolution, or future evolution of Bitcoin. Is what we're talking about like an argument for protocol ossification, or like how do you view ossification when it comes to something like Bitcoin?
Yeah, so I actually argue that it's against ossification because I think that a big part of what went wrong with email, for example, was that the protocol did ossify. But while you can ossify a network protocol, you cannot ossify the rest of the world that exists. And the protocol exists inside of the world. And so basically what we saw was as adoption continued increasing, as new types of attacks came along that had not been envisioned by the original protocol developers, solutions were demanded. And since the solutions could not really be physically baked into the protocol any longer because it was too dispersed, it was too hard to get everybody to upgrade. There were examples of this, like practical example of a solution to a lot of this was Adam Back's hash cache algorithm, which would have, similarly enough to Bitcoin, like flipped everything on its head, right? Instead of like imposing costs and rules and validations at a few centralized gatekeeper points to stop spam, instead you push it out to the edges. You impose costs on everyone who is actually using the protocol to spin their CPU. And the world of email would probably look very different today if the protocol had adopted hash cache back in the 90s. So this is why I think that it's important to always consider like how can we potentially make a fundamental change at the base level of the protocol if the only alternative is bolting things on top of it that are going to be more centralized. So we don't have I mean, there are some examples that we could point to today. I would say like one of the biggest ones, if we're talking about Bitcoin and scalability, one thing that's really irking me right now is that there's a lot of people that are essentially saying, we scale Bitcoin through ETFs and custodians, right? And so it's like that's the exact analogous example of, oh, we solve a problem by just having everybody use a single point of failure, and that this now undermines some of the most fundamental and valuable aspects of Bitcoin. So I actually had a really pithy tweet just a few days ago where I basically said, yeah, you can solve Bitcoin scaling with trusted third parties, just like you can solve all of your personal problems with a bullet to the head.
Yeah. Well, I was going to ask you, what your opinion is on the ETFs and like BlackRock and Grosso's entry. And I think you're right. Like, to use those kind of misses the entire point. You're not enjoying any of the benefits of the decentralized authority that's created, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's
not your
fine from
keys,
a
not your
financial.
crypto. So,
It makes sense from a financial perspective, and I hold Bitcoin ETFs, but I hold them inside of 401ks and IRAs that were already centralized and could potentially be rugged. And I actually almost got rugged by the SEC a few years ago because they delisted uh, Bitcoin ETN that I had put all of my retirement money into. And that was a whole year long ordeal. I have a whole blog post about that. But it's not something that I think that people should be putting their like regular savings or investments into, as long as self custody is still an option.
right. So, why is self custody so important?
It really comes down to power once again of if you really want to keep the network decentralized, if you want for your Bitcoin to actually be yours rather than essentially holding an IOU where you have to ask permission from someone who can deny it for any arbitrary reason. The best security model that Bitcoin provides requires that you hold your own keys. This is once again about gatekeepers and validation. The great thing about using network protocols, if you're using them directly, as long as you're following the rules of the protocol doesn't care who you are, how old you are, your gender, any characteristics. It doesn't even care if you're human. It doesn't know. And this can tie into AI agents as well in the future. But this is one of the fundamental things that I've been fighting against for almost 10 years now, working at BitGo and now at Casa, of trying to push self-custody adoption by making self-custody easier, lowering the technical hurdles required in order to get into robust self-custody. I've been fighting against human nature. And human nature is essentially uh, to strive for convenience
Yes.
at the expense of almost everything else. And so
Yeah.
that's why I don't consider my competitors to be the other self-custody providers. I consider my competitors to be the trusted third parties who, because they're shoving all of the complexity, under the hood, behind the screen of a really slick user interface, they have a massive advantage there because the average person cares about convenience more than security, more than privacy, more than these abstract concepts that many people don't think about until it's too late. So that's why one of our primary goals at Casa is make it as easy as possible. Sometimes that does require not pushing forward the most secure solution. And a good example of that is just a few weeks ago, we announced that we were the first company that has figured out how to store private keys inside of a YubiKey. And a YubiKey is arguably not as secure as something like a Ledger or a Trezor, this fully self-contained computing device. But from the UX perspective, from the users, amount of hoops that they have to jump through to actually set it up and maintain it, it's an order of magnitude more convenient. So what we're trying to, play around with and determine now is, can we get people, how many more people can we get to adopt self-custody if we push the convenience out further with a very slight expense on the security side?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then it also scales with the amount of value that they're trying to secure, right? Like, you don't need to have, a safety deposit box with your hardware wallets in there and some backup location of something on written in steel for $10 worth of
Right.
whatever your favorite asset is. So this can be introduced. I mean, with Status, we basically have faced similar challenges and thought about it in similar ways. I think the YubiKey is a great idea to get keys on that. People already have them, and I think they can understand them a lot easier. We had a similar approach, I think, where we ended up taking the Java card platform and building out signers for that. And then we're extending it with UTF and stuff like that. So we're trying to make a YubiKey out of them as much as we can. But yeah, it's kind of cool to see there's a convergence in some ideas around that. When it comes to convenience, so the shame is at the time they make these choices of convenience, but then when a black swan event happens, that's kind of a lesson for a learning time or learning event, right? It's it kind of requires that high energy input to be able to move, change equilibrium or change state for people to do that, and then most people don't. I think a friend of mine was using LastPass until the previous hack that went through, and they finally took on KeePass, even though I've been harping on about it for years. Yeah, right.
It's also cyclical. I think that sort of each new cohort of adopters in the space has to relearn the lessons that older cohorts learned. So I think this is why we keep seeing massive exchange hacks every few years, or massive rug pulls every few years. And I don't think that that's necessarily going to stop until we reach some sort of saturation point, because it's both the operators of these things that are coming along and not learning from history, and then of course it's all the new adopters that are coming along and not learning from history until they get burned.
Yeah, I mean, at the time I was more in the Ethereum space, right? And you're obviously familiar with the DAO hack, and so a lot of lessons were learned in that period of time. And then once the sort of DeFi crowd started coming in and building on the technology, I was looking at some of their code and I was mortified that they were deploying these things onto mainnet, right? But they've learned their lessons in a similar way, and I would tend to agree. I think part of me, I don't know if this is nostalgic or even maybe I wouldn't say a gatekeeper attitude, but I feel this also kind of brings me back to say cultural transmission, right? Is it just that people have to relearn these things, or can we do a better job of education and getting these ideas out? I'm not really sure on that front. I feel like it's just human nature to just YOLO it until they hit a wall.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pessimistic and disillusioned about educating people when it comes to security and privacy. You can try to teach people all day long, but if they don't see the practical value in it, they're not going to learn it. They're not going to retain it. And so it seems, and I think this is also one thing that I've come to believe about sort of Bitcoin evangelism as well. In the early days, those first few years when I was getting into the space, I was going out and really evangelizing this new money to all of my peers, my social circles and whatnot. And it pretty much fell on deaf ears, right? This was 2013, 2014. Um, I was also, I was pitching it to the wrong crowd, right? I didn't realize that, everyone in my social group, they were well off financially. They had access to um, financial infrastructure. They had no concerns about inflation or monetary policy, and so I basically came off as the paranoid libertarian guy who could be easily dismissed because I just had all these sort of kooky fringe ideas. And so it was probably like 1 or 2% of people who actually bought into my fringe ideas back then. And so, point being, you can't force these things onto people who don't see the value in them.
Mm.
And so these days, I more focus on waiting for the people who have the pain points and have the need to come to me and say, I want to learn. And then I have plenty of educational resources available for anyone who wants to learn.
Right. I mean, uh, I kind of find I kind of find that funny, right? Because like for me, almost everyone has the pain point. Like I guess I am the quirky guy in the room going, "You're all debt slaves," right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't realize it. But maybe now, with the sovereign debt being not bought up as fast as it used to be, and the rampant money printing that's happening within the de facto world reserve currency that is the United States dollar, I think people are starting to feel the pressure of inflation a lot more. I even hear it, like I take my dogs down for a walk in the park, and there's people who are now having to go between different groceries just to find the best deal, right?
Yep.
Because they're low on this Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Yeah, and so even then, they're not thinking about like what is the root cause of all of this, right? They're
Right.
just like, I just need to get my affordable groceries.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, if trends, if the debt isn't restructured magically and the current trend continues, then that might be something they're more receptive to hear potentially.
But it very well may be that we have to get to a mandibles type situation if you're familiar with that book.
Yeah. Yeah.
It like I said at the very beginning, I'm not sure that any of these systems are going to fail gracefully.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, I guess switching gears a little bit, how do you think about privacy?
It's a nightmare. I spent the first decade of my career on the opposite side of the privacy battle.
Really?
I worked for an online marketing company, and I was basically doing cloud computing, large scale data analytics back when the cloud was just becoming a term. Like most people didn't even know what cloud computing was. This was back in like 2008, 2009. Um, and so I saw the petabytes and petabytes of raw information that my company was collecting on a daily basis, because we would have anywhere from tens to hundreds of millions of emails that were sent out through our system, which would then, of course, collect all of the opens and clicks and conversion data and so on and so forth. So my job was to help marketers optimize the return on their investment in our marketing engine, which basically boils down to help them target people to sell specific products to the right people who are most likely to buy them. And we would use every bit of data that we could get. And of course, when you start collaborating with other corporate surveillance machines out there, you can really start piecing a lot of data together and build entire complex profiles around people. So that's when I really learned, like, just in your sort of day-to-day internet browsing, how much data is collected about you. And so you're already starting out at a major disadvantage. And there's a lot that you can do, but once again, it comes down to like how much time and effort are you willing to put into it. I do tell most people that the easiest and most effective thing that you can do is just install ad blockers into all of your browsers, and that will stop a lot of it. But for me, I went down the extreme privacy journey in 2018 because my physical location was compromised and I was attacked. Basically, had a SWAT team sent to my house under false pretenses, and that's when I realized that this privacy thing is real. Like there's actual physical safety ramifications, especially if you're a public figure who has hundreds of thousands of people paying attention to you. And so that's when I went down the extreme physical privacy rabbit hole and determined that that's beyond the reach of all but the most dedicated people, because you basically end up having to spend tens of thousands of dollars at a minimum, and then thousands of dollars a year maintenance in order to set up all of the appropriate entities to sufficiently obfuscate where you are, what things you own, and basically create proxies between your real identity and like corporate or trust identities that will be on any public records. And the public records are a big deal, but then, like I said, as well, there's all the corporate surveillance stuff. So even staying out of a lot of those private databases gets tricky as well, and you can even get to the point of essentially disinformation campaigns and setting up a lot of fake information just to sort of sow seeds of doubt, so that if someone does try to come after you, instead, the average person, you can pay like $20 and go to one of these people search engines, and in many cases you can find exactly like where they live and their vehicles are registered and so on and so forth. And in order to prevent someone from being able to do that against you, requires a lot of effort and attorneys and ongoing maintenance to make sure that you're kind of like keeping all of these like plates spinning in the air, so that if someone tries to find you, they're going to be sent off on a wild goose chase.
Nice. I guess that's what OPSEC is all about. Do you have like a guide on that, or is there a reference that you would recommend people who want to go like the full extreme privacy route?
Yeah. Well, at the time when I did it, there weren't any great guides. There were one or two books that weren't particularly in depth for like all of the different aspects of your life. But thankfully, Michael Bizel, and that's not his real name, but he publishes a book called Extreme Privacy. And he basically comes out with a new version of it almost every year. And I think the 5th edition is about to come out any day now.
Oh, nice.
And it's not cheap. I want to say it's like $50 or $70, and it's print only. He doesn't distribute digital copies of it. And every year a new edition comes out and adds like another 50 or 100 pages to it. So I bet this 5th edition is going to be like 700 pages or something.
Wow.
Because it just keeps getting more and more complicated, and the rules of the game keep changing, and like the technological mitigations to some of these things keeps changing at a faster pace.
You're right. Do you think that can be democratized in time, right?
There are services that exist to make it easier. There are some like cyber security and privacy health check services that will do things like monitor a lot of these people search engines, monitor for data leaks, help automate hardening settings of a lot of different services that you use to minimize data leaks.
But then you're exposing yourself to them,
Yeah,
right?
you're basically using a trusted third party to do a lot of the heavy lifting for it. So trade offs, right? There was also an article just the other day that came out that said that there was testing of a lot of these automated data removal services was found to be far less effective than going through them manually. And that is also one of the things that Michael Bazzell has this entire data removal handbook of essentially you can write letters to all of these different services to basically say, remove me from all of your databases. And I don't, I myself don't do that. I think like you have a couple of different options. Either like if you're already in a place where you're essentially doxxed and it's easy to find you, then you can try the data removal path and that'll maybe get rid of like 90 or 95% of stuff. But you can't delete data once it's already out there on the internet. Not 100% for sure. I went the other more difficult path, which is like I sold off all of my publicly registered assets and moved and basically burned down my entire life from a public data perspective and restarted it with a hardened perspective. And very, very few people are going to do that unless they probably have had some sort of credible threat against their life where they feel like they are in physical danger.
You're right. That's getting quite close to doing a do-it-yourself witness protection program, right?
Pretty much, yeah, because I also had to come up with pseudonyms, backstories, because essentially I don't tell my physical neighbors obviously who I really am, because I have to assume that they would leak that, and people are gossipy. That's just human nature.
You find that like I mean, like how does that affect you mentally, right? Like, is there like I think people looking out, like from being on the outside and looking at that, like there's a level of paranoia there, and in your case, it's justified because you've had your physical life potentially threatened. Um, like, I mean, is society so sick that's just the way things have to be for people like us,
Yeah, so for the first year or two, it was awkward. You feel like you're like living a double life, but it just becomes a new habit, a new part of your personality. And the short way that I describe like a lot of my privacy techniques is lying. And and lying is generally it's kind of against human nature. It's easier to tell the truth, it's harder to keep track of lies. And so if you're going down that path, you have to keep it. This is one thing I screwed up early on, is like I was creating a different alias for like each different person and service provider that I was dealing with, and so it was overly complex. I couldn't keep track of it all. You really got to simplify it for your own sanity.
Create
But like,
entire profiles and personalities and like traces for each one of those identities as well, right? Like that's insane.
yeah, I mean, you can go as far with it as you want to, but it is a lot of mental overhead. And the short version to a lot of this privacy stuff is, and I think that Michael Bazzell says this as well, is that um, at least in America, the vast majority of time, it's completely legal to lie about who you are and what you do. Really, the only times that it's illegal is when you're entering into some sort of like legal contract where you're attesting that you are who you are and that you're going to abide by some sort of agreement. But otherwise, it just sort of it becomes second nature, and it's mainly the overhead of having to keep track of I have like a ton of different email addresses and a ton of different like throwaway phone numbers and a ton of different
Yeah.
like virtual debit cards and financial payment mechanisms and so on and so forth. And so it is a lot to juggle to basically maintain a segregation between like different aspects of your life.
You're right. Well, I mean, I don't think I've ever heard a security officer talk about security through obfuscation, but I definitely see I can see the utility in this case for sure. Uh, I mean, it sounds like it's going to become more and more required, especially like what's happening in the UK right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can't even post on social media anymore without the threat of coercion. That terrifies me. I don't know if you've kept up to date with that at all.
Yeah, but also in the long term, I'm somewhat pessimistic on the physical privacy stuff too.
Mm.
But, thankfully, we don't have a ton of like physical surveillance in America, at least outside of the big cities. Um, but to give you an example, like I have um, toll booth uh, scanner thing, right? And thankfully, even though that's tracking what the car is going through, my car is not registered to me. The toll booth scanner thing is also registered to a corporation. But they could be taking photos and potentially doing facial recognition as you're passing through there. And in general, I do expect that we're going to hit a point where I won't be able to go out into meat space and not be recognized. And one of the reasons for that is things like I think like Meta has those Ray-Ban glasses, for example, that have the camera built into them, kind of like Google Glass from a decade ago, but even better.
Mm.
And it's only a matter of time before people are going to have like built into their glasses, if not contact lenses, augmented reality display that will be able to like pick up your faces, run facial recognition against them, and then immediately like display a lot of information about you. And I have no real countermeasure to facial recognition.
Yeah. Yeah, everyone will have a body cam one way or the other. I mean, they already do. It's just in their pockets, right?
Yep.
So that's a tough problem. I guess in speaking of like countermeasures, is there any like uh, there's been, obviously like other sort of privacy projects have come up, such as like Zcash or Monero, trying to address some of these issues that are found in Bitcoin, for example. Are you hopeful for similar methods to be employed by Bitcoin, or how do you think these things should operate or evolve in any way?
Well, I am doubtful we will ever see uh, privacy protection that's this sort of Monero or shielded Zcash transaction level of privacy, because those make it difficult to audit, like
Mm.
the supply against inflation bugs, for example. I think
Mm.
Zcash actually had an inflation bug. I think it may. They don't think that it was exploited, but there was an inflation bug
Yeah,
that they
I
had to patch
remember.
at some point.
Yeah.
Um, and there are a number of potential privacy improvements, but these are all going to be sort of iterative. I actually was on a panel a few weeks ago where we were talking about cross input signature aggregation. And the short version to that is that like there is a potential path to a future in which Bitcoin economically incentivizes it for you to participate in CoinJoin mixing, where it would
Mm.
be cheaper to transact via CoinJoin than to just do a regular transaction. And that would, I would say, be my most optimistic take on improving Bitcoin privacy, is if we can do so in such a way that economically incentivizes people to use it, because once again, people don't care about privacy, but they do care about saving money.
Gotcha. Well, we're out of time, unfortunately. I would love to continue chatting with you. I guess, like, to wrap it up, what are you most hopeful for, or like, what are you excited for in the upcoming short or medium term future? And if there's any other recommended reads that the audience should check out.
Well, in Bitcoin land, the past year has been interesting because it seems like we're seeing an acceleration of development of people playing around with what you could call layer 2 technologies. I would say a lot of them are centralized in various ways or are speculative upon certain changes happening to the base layer protocol. And this is, I think, going to be one of the main things that I'm going to be harping on and pushing for, is that there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin space who believe that like Bitcoin can do anything and you can build anything on top of Bitcoin. Just look at Lightning, for example. But that they're also the sort of ossifiers. They're too afraid of changing the base protocol. And one of the things I'm going to be trying to get across to people is like, look, like Lightning itself wouldn't exist if we hadn't made 3 changes to the base protocol to enable it. And there are a number of proposed changes to the base protocol that would enable a greater explosion of innovation in the second layer space. And that's, I think, the main thing that I want to see happen is just improvements that allow for more building on top of Bitcoin without having to make trade-offs of having like centralized gatekeepers like in and out of second layers. It's this the promise that we were given a decade ago with the sidechains white paper, that we were going to have this massive ecosystem of many pegged chains to each other, and that never happened because we never actually got a working trustless two-way pegging mechanism. But if we can get something like that, and there are some proposals that I think would make it feasible, then perhaps we will really see a new renaissance of building on top of Bitcoin.
Fingers crossed. I'm looking forward to it. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.